Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies week after week. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi. These live internet studies are brought to you week after week. They are an hour and a half long, generally speaking, broken up into two topics across two segments. The first segment is eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events, where we talk about everything related to end times. We've been working our way basically up to a commentary in the book of Revelation, but we had to start way back in Daniel and work our way through topics like Antichrist, Yeshua's discourse that he gave on the Mount of Olives, and we then worked our way through Rapture, and now we're in a discussion on Mystery Babylon, right? Revelation chapter 17 and 18, and we're using notes from a Christian author by the name of Chris White to examine his thesis on who the identity of Mystery Babylon is. Don't want to spoil it for you, but it's a candidate that is absolutely shocking and scandalous at face value. So that's segment one. Segment two is the Trinitarian look at biblical Unitarian. So it's basically called a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism, where I, a biblical Trinitarian, examine passages in the Bible that have been historically interpreted as Trinitarian, but then along comes Biblical Unitarian, biblicalunitarian.com, and they challenge that perspective. And they say, no, you Trinitarians are misunderstanding those passages. And so they put forth the Unitarian, non-Trinitarian perspective. And I'm saying, no, let's take these verses back for the Trinitarian side. So it's kind of like a mock debate. So that's segment two. All right, let's jump right into segment one, eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. What we are working from are notes that are borrowed from my own essay that I wrote on Chris White's book entitled Mystery Babylon, When Jerusalem Embraces the Antichrist, an exposition of Revelation 17 and 18. You can see on your screen right now, this is a book that is available at his website at BibleProphecyText.com. It's also available on Amazon and things like that. But Chris White has made this book available for free online. So if you go to this link that is in the video description below, if you go to this link, then if you look over on the right side, you'll see some other book titles, and one of them is Mystery Babylon. If you click on that, then you'll be taken to the online version of the book. And so you can read it for free online. He also encourages people to interact with his material and share it with others. So what a gracious author he is. So that I took that opportunity to create my own essay and work from that. So we are in week 4, basically, of my own essay. And we're working our way down through Chris White's book. We're in week 4. We took a little bit of an excursus break last time in video land to kind of zero more in on what does Chris White think about this beast that the woman is writing, this Antichrist man. There are some questions that arise about his life, his death, and his resurrection, if he indeed is going to go through those things. So we took some time out from the kind of Mystery Babylon study to focus on the beast and the man that she's in collaboration with. Indeed, in Revelation chapter 17, the chapter that we're focusing on, which will include 18 as well, but we're not there yet. In Revelation 17, we're focusing on the identity of Mystery Babylon, which is the woman who's riding a scarlet beast, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. But John is told by the angel who's communicating with him that the beast has the identity of being this Antichrist figure who will one day persecute Christians and Jews, who will one day demand worldwide worship of himself, who will impose a mark system on the world, and he will just wreak havoc with all that is good and righteous and true, and we need to be warned about this individual. So we took time to look at that. In week 4 now, let's just work from the notes that I'm borrowing. There's going to be a lot of repetition in week 4, and it's there because when we read through John's vision in Revelation 17, we read that he sees this woman, he sees the beast, he sees the heads, and he describes what he sees, and then the angel comes right back and gives him the interpretation of what he sees. And in the interpretation, we get a repeat of not only what John saw, but then we get the explanation of what the angel is telling him what it means. So in my essay here, there has to be some repetition as well, because I'm kind of going verse by verse. So follow along with me in this video. I'm working from notes that you're not seeing in the video, but those of you who are with me in the live class, you can see my notes, the little script that I put together, so I can make sure that I'm keeping track of my time. All right, so week 4, the woman and the scarlet beast. Let's work our way down through this commentary that I'm using. Give me a moment. I want to do some highlighting here. There we go. All right. So far in this series on Mystery Babylon that we're working through, we've laid a lot of groundwork. In week 1, we introduced the debate over who Mystery Babylon really is. Remember, many people interpret, many people interpret Mystery Babylon as not just a system, like a religious or political or financial system, but they interpret Mystery Babylon as a city. I'm of the impression that it's a little bit of both, but I cannot dismiss the fact that it definitely is a city. It has characteristics that are consistent with being a city. And because it is a city, there are many proposals that are put forth. Is it Mecca? Is it New York City, like America? Is it ancient Babylon come back from the dead, rebuilt Babylon? Is it Rome, Vatican City? You know, the seat of the papal power, papal power today. That's a tongue twister, papal power. Papacy. Or is it Jerusalem? And you'd be surprised to find out that historically, like say from a preterist perspective, Jerusalem was a big candidate. Yeah, back in the early days, a lot of Christian authors, in fact, it's one of the earlier views that it is historical Jerusalem. Well, I'm now saying that I believe it is, there's a strong candidate for Jerusalem being the city that Mystery Babylon is, that John sees, but not necessarily today's Jerusalem, rather the Jerusalem that will enter into Daniel's 70th week. So in week 2, we studied John's initial vision of the woman and the beast in Revelation 17, 1-6. And we saw why the harlot city is identified with Jerusalem. In week 3, we examined the angel's interpretation in Revelation 17, 7-18. So we finished out reading the chapter there. And from that part of our study, we saw that the beast is the Antichrist. So here's again where there's some overlap between a man and a system. So in one sense, what John is seeing has aspects of being a city and a person, a man. On the other hand, both Mystery Babylon and the beast that she's writing have details or aspects that include world systems, religious institutions, political powers, what I could say are financial strongholds, things like that. So what we're talking about ultimately is a satanic attempt on the adversary's part to overthrow all that God establishes, which would include, right, his truth, his word, his kingdom, his Messiah, his people, his promises, all of that. Satan is seeking to destroy all that, to take the authority, to rule in God's place, to subjugate humanity to his evil agenda. And so it makes sense that he's going to have his tendrils, his tentacles in every facet of human existence to the best of his ability. He's going to corrupt politics. He's going to corrupt religion. He's going to corrupt finances. He's going to corrupt families and relationships. He's going to corrupt people groups to the best of his ability. He's going to subjugate wherever he goes. Remember, he's the lion that roars about and seeks to devour. So we saw that this beast is the Antichrist. So we need to come back to this idea that even though there are world systems in play, remember the woman and the beast are both riding or sitting atop many waters, which the angel tells John are peoples. But ultimately, what the book of Revelation does is it draws our attention into a focus that the beast is a figure, a man that's going to come onto the scene and be supernaturally empowered by Satan to do the evil things that he's going to do. So the beast is the Antichrist. Ultimately, it equals the Antichrist. The 7 heads are kings, not hills. This is a common misunderstanding, even though John talks about that he saw hills. It's, again, we're talking about symbols. And the woman is clearly identified as a great city, a city that the beast himself eventually destroys. Right, go figure. So tonight in week 4, we're turning to chapter 3 of Chris White's book, where he zeroes in on the woman's relationship to the beast. And this chapter helps us understand how Jerusalem will function in the end times, not merely as a city under siege, but as a false priestess leading the nations into idolatry and then being betrayed by the very one she worships. This is an important aspect of the study, because many times in our study of the book of Revelation and end time events, we often focus on the corrupt political power that Satan's going to wield in the end days, or we Christians notice the counterfeit religions that he's going to be pushing in the day, right? Remember, Yeshua himself warned his disciples in his Olivet discourses, warning away from false Christs, people claiming to be Jesus, people claiming to be the Messiah that has been promised. Yeshua said, warning, danger, danger, don't fall for that. That there's going to be a great deception in the final days, and you need to be on your guard. You need to be studied up. You need to be reliant upon the Holy Spirit inside of you. Well, this idea that Satan is going to do whatever he can to corrupt all of the different areas that we as humans interact with sometimes draws us away from the fact that one of the primary roles that Mystery Babylon is going to play in the end times is, if Chris White's thesis is accurate, Mystery Babylon will entice the entire world into false worship. She will, because she is drunk with the idolatry and fornication of false doctrine and bad theology and corruption and all of the stuff that we want to run away from, the stuff that we as genuine Christians want to avoid. But she is headlong into it. She has fully embraced it. Her drunkenness on this debauchery carries over and into it, and actually influences the rest of the world and the kings and the leaders of the world to follow after her in this false worship of this man, this beast, this endorsement of his program. And so in this sense, she is like a priestess. She is facilitating false worship, a false god, a counterfeit Messiah. That's why his name Antichrist is so prominent in our studies. So here's the roadmap for tonight. Number 1, we're going to revisit the woman's appearance, especially her clothing. We're going to be looking for themes that are related to point number 2. Her garments compare her to a high priest. That's what we're going to be looking at. That's the thesis that Chris White's working from. Number 3, we're going to examine the meaning of her golden cup. We're not going to get excessively deep in the details, because remember, this is symbolism, and it's like a parable. You want to capture the central theme of a parable without getting lost behind all the details and trying to come up with interpretations for every little detail. You have to balance it out. Yes, you want to notice the details, but at the same time, you don't want to get so laser focused on all of the minor details that you forget the big picture and you lose the big picture. So same thing with John's revelation. Point number 4, we're going to explore how Jerusalem becomes a counterfeit priestly city, essentially. And then point number 5 tonight, we'll see how and why the beast turns on her. All right, I realize this is a heavy topic, I say in my notes, but I believe that it will help us see more clearly why Jerusalem is identified as Mystery Babylon in the last days, and why this view is absolutely not anti-Semitic, and why it's not against Torah, or it's not some form of anti-Semitism to suggest that God's covenant city is going to play a very dangerous part when it comes to end-time scenario, end-time events, and Antichrist's dominion on the world scene at the time. I believe Jerusalem will unwittingly, unknowingly, unfortunately, be complicit in this crime of this false religion and this evil agenda that's going to plague humanity in the last 7 years. The point I keep stressing, however, is that Jerusalem of today doesn't fit this role yet. Even though she's in unbelief in terms of her Messiah, she's not gotten to the point where she's allowed the Antichrist to come in, set up headquarters, and to eventually declare himself as God. And yet we know from reading the Bible that one day a man will take a seat in the temple of God. This is Paul, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. A man will go in to an existing temple. It's not there now, but apparently there should be something in the future. He's going to go in, declare himself to be God, demand worldwide worship, and institute some type of a digital passport that allows you to buy or sell, right, the mark of the beast. Okay, so let's jump into part 1, rereading of Revelation 17:3 through 6. This should only take about 5 minutes. So let's start by revisiting part of the vision that we read before. Again, for those of you who are following this study and you've already watched week 1 through 3, then some of this will feel like recap. It is by design because we took a little bit of a break during the festivals to do that excursus on the Antichrist. Revelation 17, New American Standard Bible, the doom of Babylon. Let's start in verse 1. We're just reading for recap purposes. Let's start in verse 3. John's talking about the vision now. He says, he carried me away, speaking about the angel, he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 4, the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls, holding in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her sexual immorality. Of course, we know by now that John is referring to spiritual immorality, spiritual uncleanness or sexual immorality. He's not talking about physical. He's talking about that from God's vantage point. Whenever people, and in particularly God's people, whenever they are expected of God to be covenantally faithful, but in spite of that, they are found to be dabbling in false religion or playing with other gods, entertaining, religious practices with false worship of the peoples that they interact with. Then from God's perspective, God calls this playing the harlot. This is one of the more common terms that you find in the Old Testament translation into English, playing the harlot. Well, this is sexual immorality from God's perspective. It's spiritual harlotry because God is the only true husband of his people, and therefore worship of a false god is tantamount to committing adultery with someone who's not your spouse. And in Israel's case, she fell into this over and over again. Verse 5, and on her forehead, this woman that John sees, a name was written, a mystery, and in all caps in many Bibles, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth, period. And then let's see, do I want to read verse 6? Nope. Yes, we do. We want to read one last verse. Verse 6, John says, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. All right, let's go back over to my notes. So what we're noticing in this part of the vision is that this is the heart of the picture that we're dealing with tonight. Her clothing, her jewelry, her cup, and her position riding on the beast. We're just going to go through this. This is going to feel somewhat quick for those of you who have followed the study because a lot of this is repeat. And if you've watched the previous studies, then I've already kind of made my main points. So a lot of this, like I said, will feel like review. So part 2, the woman's clothing and the high priest. Let's take a few minutes to examine this connection here. Chris White, the one whose book that I'm drawing from in my essay here, he makes an important observation here. The woman's clothing is described in almost priestly terms. And if his thesis is accurate, it's meant to be this way so that we begin to realize not only who the identity of who this woman is, i.e., this woman is someone that should be teaching truth, right? The priests of Israel in that day, one of their job functions was to facilitate the animal sacrifices and the communion between God's people and God himself. They were the go-betweens. They were the intermediaries between the people of God and the Spirit of God or the presence of God that was actually there in the tabernacles or the temples. The function of a priest, however, is also like a prophet. It's to give truth to the people, to be those who champion Torah, those who give accurate rulings and judgments when court matters are brought up. These are many functions of priests and sometimes prophets and things like that. Well, if Mystery Babylon is in the position where she has this priestly role, she should be teaching truth. But by the time Daniel's 70th week is upon us, we're going to find that Mystery Babylon is actually teaching error. She's facilitating worship of the Antichrist. That's why she's playing this role. And by looking at her garment, by looking at the way that John saw her, perhaps that's what the symbolism is meant to portray, is that why was John shown these particular colors? And so let's just kind of glance at some of them. Purple and scarlet are both colors used in the tabernacle and the priestly garments. Remember, John's vision draws heavily on existing themes and shadows and types and language that's already found in the Bible that John carried, namely the Tanakh, or what we Christians call the Old Testament. So it would be best if we first looked back into our own Bibles to begin to ascertain as to what the identity of this woman is, rather than trying to speculate like looking at her and saying, well, let's see, the Catholic Church, the priests and cardinals and bishops and popes, they wear scarlet and red and purple and green. Maybe it's the Roman Church. Maybe it's Vatican City. Maybe it's a revived Roman Empire. Things like that. I don't think that John would necessarily anticipate that that's the direction that we would go once he penned these details. To be sure, in John's day, there was no Catholic Church. So you have to remember the very first century readers, the very initial readership that lived in the first century, when they interacted with John's letter, there's no possible or probable way that their mind would have raced and jumped to a Catholic Church. It just wouldn't have probably popped into their mind. I think rather they would have done what John was anticipating they would do, which was go back into the existing authoritative scriptures that they had, the Tanakh. So that's what we're doing. Chris White does a great job there. Look also that she's adorned with gold and precious stones, reminiscent of the high priest's breastplate with its precious stones also. And then lastly, she's got this gold cup, and we see that used in temple service. Remember also that in terms of Mystery Babylon as a city, in the case of Jerusalem, God's holy city, ultimately, if you've read your Bible, you know that ultimately God's city is likened to a bride adorned with jewels and gold and such. And John even sees her later on in his letter and describes her as coming down out of heaven. And we believers are going to dwell there one day. And so Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, is God's bride. And also even earthly Jerusalem in the past, God chose Israel as his people. He chose Jerusalem as the city to bear his name. He chose to reveal his son to us, be born of Jewish lineage, be raised in the land of Israel, and to walk and teach in Jerusalem and to interact with people that lived in Israel. So Jerusalem plays prominently in the Bible by design, but notice that when she is playing the bride of the role of a righteous bride, she is also in some ways functioning as a priest, but in the righteous sense, in the holy sense. Indeed, from God's perspective, Jerusalem and Israel are chosen to highlight his truths and to showcase them, to share them with the rest of the world. We even know that one day the truth will flow from the epicenter of Jerusalem. What does Isaiah say in chapter 2, starting around verse 4? For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. It's the Bible verse that I named my own ministry after, Tetze Torah Ministries. Tetze Torah is where that verse uses Hebrew. It says, Ki mitzion Tetze Torah u'devar Adonai mi Yerushalayim. For out of Zion the law will go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Well, right now, if you look at modern Israel, the law isn't really going forth from them, right? They're not playing the role that God designed them to play at the moment. They're in rebellion against God. They are in rejection of his Messiah. They have embraced their own traditions. They're in blindness. And so Israel isn't at that place yet where she's this light to the nations the way that she should be. Indeed, because she rejected Messiah 2,000 years ago, God decided to bring in people who would bring forth the fruit, and he brought in other tenants to this field, and the Gentile Christians have been playing that part of bringing this light to the nations. Israel has kind of taken a back seat. She hasn't been replaced, but she's been sat in timeout for a little while. Well, God's going to start dealing with her and bringing her back into this role again. But before that happens, Mystery Babylon is going to come onto the scene and play a very damaging role, and I believe that Jerusalem is going to be that one. Let's keep going in my study. At first glance, this city, this woman, she looks like she belongs in a temple, right? She looks religious, she's priestly, she's dignified. But there's a crucial omission. If you've noticed, if you're one who pays attention to details, in Exodus 28, we can read about the high priest's robe. It was also supposed to include blue. The Hebrew would be tachelet. And this blue represented heaven and God's commandments. Part of this is according to rabbinic tradition. Part of this we just glean from details in the text, and we fill in the missing pieces. But you can go back and read Numbers 15:38 through 40 on your own. These are passages that are included in the daily recitation of the Shema. If you're praying the set time prayers like we religious Jews do, then Numbers gets included when we don our tzitzit, when we put our prayer shawl on. There's a passage out of Numbers that we read and we recite, and we read the Hebrew and the English, and we thumb the tzitzit that are on our tassels. We are on our garments. We kind of thumb them through our fingers and just remind ourselves that these represent God's commandments and to be righteous and holy. They don't make us holy in and of themselves, don't get confused, but they are a visible reminder. They're kind of like God's first witness wear, or tie a string around your finger so you don't forget, that kind of concept. Well, in this vision of this woman, if indeed Chris White's thesis is accurate that she's meant to be a kind of a counterfeit priest, well, she doesn't have any blue. She's missing the blue. And we surmised last week that perhaps, or the week prior, perhaps this means that, as I say in my notes, this woman has scarlet and purple but no blue. And what does it mean? Perhaps it means that she has the outward trappings of priesthood, but she lacks obedience to God's law. She's dressed in religion, but she's missing holiness. And I go on to say in my notes that this is a warning. This is a warning for us today as Christians. Outward religiosity means nothing without inward obedience. A person can look spiritual. Yeah, they can. They can look priestly. They can even look godly. But remember, God sees through the heart. If the commandments of God are missing, it's all a sham. If the genuine faith in God, which leads to genuine faith in Messiah, which is the central commandment of the law. We talked about this in my class prior to the YouTube video recording. We talked about this with the students who are in the class right now. If the commandments have one central purpose, it's to lead us to the goal of embracing Messiah, Yeshua, which then would lead to the Holy Spirit taking up residency within us, which then would lead to the empowerment to actually walk in the commandments the way that God designed us to walk them out. Walking them out under our own power was never the goal of the Holy Spirit's infilling us. It was never the goal of the Torah to walk it out under our own power. Merit theology was never the goal. Legalism was never the goal. But still, walking out the commandments was one of the goals, right? And my point here in this point of our essay is that perhaps Mystery Babylon simply looks religious, like many religious people in the world do, and they think that their religiosity is what matters most. And I'm saying that they're sadly mistaken, and I don't want you to fall into that trap also. Jerusalem in the end times will be clothed like a priest, but Perhaps she'll be missing obedience. She'll function as a counterfeit priesthood is the point. All right, part 3, as I mentioned, this is going to go somewhat quickly tonight because a lot of this is repeat. The golden cup of abominations that John sees. Let's look at the cup that she holds. Revelation 17:4 says that she holds a gold cup of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And in my estimation of the book that I read, Chris White's book on Mystery Babylon being eschatological Jerusalem, here again, when we look at these symbols, I like to think that we're meant to think of temple service. And again, remind yourself that in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, golden cups were used to hold drink offerings and to pour out libations before the Lord. Meaning the cups were instruments that were used in service to God, and they were not meant to hold filth. They were not meant to hold abominable substances like this woman's clearly is, right? In this case, the cup isn't filled with wine that's offered to God. It's filled with abominations, idolatrous practices, spiritual filth, moral corruption. The things that God hates, she has in her cup. And she's not only drunk on this substance herself, but if you carefully read the text that we read in Revelation, she actually causes the nations to be drunk on these idolatrous practices, this abominations, this spiritual filth, this moral corruption. So that's why I say she's a dangerous player, whoever she turns out to be. Let's say Chris White is wrong and it doesn't turn out to be eschatological Jerusalem. So what? What if it's New York? What if it's Vatican City? What if it's Mecca? What if it's rebuilt Babylon? Whoever she turns out to be, she's going to be a dangerous player in the end times, someone that brings a lot of harm to God's people in the end. Remember, when she rises to power, ultimately, we're going to see worldwide tribulation of Christians and Jews, persecution the likes that the world has never seen, according to Yeshua and Daniel.